Okay, so I want to do a couple of quick examples that'll hopefully help you out in terms of working with both arrays and strings. Let's just start off with a very simple example, and I'm going to create a string. And so we know things are working here. We'll run this, and we see hello world. Great. So what I want to do is, let's say that we wanted to have some method that would do something like this. We're going to get an array back, and we'll call this toArray, and we'll pass in a string. Right? Obviously, we did this. This is going to end up failing. But if we go over here and we create our function toArray, and if I just did this, I'm going to get undefined because that's what the function returns. I'm going to pass in some input. If I just return my input, and let's do console.log ARR. So just returning the same string that I had before. So again, if I return nothing, I'm going to get back undefined. I return my input, I'll get back my string. And I don't want my string. What I want to do is convert this to an array. So there's nothing wrong. I could loop over the array, the string, right? Have some way of doing that, looping over the length of the string. But an easier way to do this would be to say input split, and split will split a string based on a character. If I use an empty character, I'll get back an array. So pretty simple way to get an array from a string. Well, let's see that I wanted to have another method called reverse array. I have this method reverse array. Obviously, it doesn't exist at this point. And let me go and modify this. Hold on, I just lost myself here for a second. So here I've got what I had up before, this reverse array, which doesn't exist at the moment. So I end up getting this error message here. Let me go back and put this in. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to pass in an array. I can call this whatever I want to. This is a local variable. Let's say I was to say return array. Okay? It's not going to do anything. It's just going to pass back the same array that I started out with. Let's say I went and I said array reverse. Fine. You can see it did reverse the array. What I want to point out is that this is kind of destructive. And when I say it's destructive, what I mean is that if I end up saying console.log, if I was to think whether or not it's actually, did I want to modify my array, or did I really just want to get a new array that was reversed? Well, if I run this, I can see that what I end up getting back from reverse array is this reversed array, and in fact, it has in fact reversed my array. So one of the things that you see here is that reverse is what we could call a destructive method. It's actually going and changing the array. Now, what if we didn't want that to happen? What if we wanted to basically get an array, but we didn't want to necessarily modify the array? We wanted to just get a new array where the values were reversed. How would we go about doing that? Well, one of the things we could do is we could create a copy of an array, but a nice little shortcut to create a copy of an array is to create a variable called copy. And there's an array method called slice, not to be confused with splice, which allows you to actually take elements and insert them into an array. Slice allows you to get a portion of an array. But the interesting thing about slice is that slice actually will you can specify how many elements you want in your new array from the old array. When you don't give it any parameters, what you're basically saying is, hey, look, give me all the elements in the old array, but give them to me in a new array. It's not recreating the elements that are in that array. In our case, it's just a string, but or characters. But what it's doing is it's actually giving us a new array. And now if I went and I said copy reverse, I could see that this reverse array method gives me a new array, but it's not necessarily destructive. So this is something to think about. If you're manipulating an object or you're creating a new object from another object, from an array, let's say, and you don't want to necessarily manipulate the array, this is a way that you could end up making a copy of the array. So one more thing that I wanted to sort of show you here is that, let's say that we're going to do something like console.log, and let's say I want to have a method, 2 arrays, meaning that I want to have more than one string that I'm going to pass in here. So my expectations are that I want to get 2 arrays back. So when I call 2 arrays, I'm going to get an array back, and each element of that array is going to be another array, one of them being 5 elements long with an H and E, an LL and an O, and the other array being a separate array with the letters W, O, R, L, D. Well, right now, obviously, 2 arrays is not a method. And what I'm sort of getting at here is the ability to deal with an unknown number of elements and how to go about doing that. And one way you could do that is that, again, if we know that there's only 2 elements that are coming back, nothing prevents me from saying AB and saying return, and this is going to be an array, and within this I'll say 2 array A and 2 array B. And let's make sure that I change this method. It's not 2 array, it's 2 arrays. Okay? So again, it gives me what I want to, a sort of nested array with the letters from hello and the letters from world over here. But let's say that I wanted to do this with 3 of these. Obviously, you're seeing that's getting ignored here. So what do you do when you have multiple elements? We spoke about this a little bit. What you can end up doing is using the arguments array. So within a function, you have this idea of this arguments, which are actually passed into the function. And they're array-like, but they're not an array. But the fact that they're array-like, what we can do is create a result and loop over our arguments and say for var I equals 0, I less than arguments dot length, right? The standard way of looping, I plus plus, and every time that we loop here, we're going to say result dot push, and we're going to say to array arguments I. So even though the arguments is not necessarily an array, we have the ability to iterate over it, which we're doing here. And now at this point, I could return result. And that'll actually end up giving us what we want to give. So, I mean, if this was something you were writing a test on, maybe you would see that this would end up giving you back 3 arrays, look at the various arrays that are nested inside that array. But again, my real takeaway here is how to make a copy of an array by using slice, realizing that certain array methods are destructive, like reverse actually reverses the array, the idea that you can turn a string into an array, and the idea that you can have an indeterminate number of elements and iterate over them with this arguments keyword.